Hey everyone, welcome to our channel, the best place for all things sewing. My name is Jesselyn, and today I'm going to show you how to make a Tami with a double hood. This is the second video in the Tami series, so don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button so you don't miss any new content. Before you get started, you need to make sure you have the correct hood pattern pieces printed out. The Tami has a few hood options, but for this pattern, for the double hood, you're going to need the outer hood pattern piece and the crossover hood pattern piece. Once you have those, you're ready to dive in. The Tami has quite a few pattern pieces, so let's go through what you will need to make the Tami with a double hood. You'll need one bodice piece for the front, one back bodice piece, two mirror image sleeve pieces, two mirror image crossover hood pieces, two outer hood pieces, two bottom band pieces cut on the fold, two cuff pieces, four mirror image pocket pieces, and 1 inch by 1 inch pieces of interfacing, and 1/4 inch grommets, and a grommet tool, and a drawstring. Now that you have all your Tami pattern pieces cut, you're ready to get started. You're going to want to take your front bodice piece and your left sleeve piece and line them up on the edge, right sides together, and then you're going to sew that down with a 3/8 seam allowance. The left sleeve piece is now sewn to the front bodice. You'll do the same thing for the other side, matching up right sides together, and sew at a 3/8 seam allowance. Now you should have the front bodice, the two sleeves attached to the front bodice, and the back bodice that I've marked with a blue clip attached to one sleeve. So now the only thing you have to do is attach the last remaining piece of the sleeve to the edge here on the back bodice. Once both sleeve pieces are connected to the front bodice, turn it right sides facing up, then take your back bodice piece and line up the matching edges to the matching sleeve edges and sew this down at a 3/8 seam allowance. So it's kind of like you're working around in a circle. You'll take the last raw edge and fold it over, and it should match up if you've done this correctly on the raw edges, and you'll sew that down at a 3/8 seam allowance. Now that the front bodice, back bodice, and both sleeve pieces are attached, it's time to move on to the pockets. If you're not adding pockets, you'll need to match up right sides together and sew down the sleeve and the side with a 3/8 seam allowance, and then repeat the same steps for the other side. The first step in adding pockets to your Tami hoodie is finding out where the pockets need to go. If you haven't already marked your pattern piece, refer back to your pattern piece, and the front and back bodice piece will show you where the standard length pocket and the long length pocket need to be attached. Now that you have the pocket placement marked with a clip on the front and back bodice, take one of the pocket pieces and place it right sides together with the rounded part facing the bottom of the bodice. Then you'll do the same thing for the other side of the front bodice, and I recommend clipping and testing the pockets to make sure they line up correctly before you sew them on the front and the back. Once you verify that the pockets are lined up correctly, sew down the edge of the pocket at a 1/4 inch seam allowance and do the same thing on all 4 pockets. At this point, you should have all pockets sewn down with a sewing machine at the 1/4 inch edge. Then open up the pocket so it's right sides up, and on a low iron setting, iron down the edge. Repeat the iron process for all 4 pockets. Now take the front bodice and back bodice pieces and match them up right sides together. Match up the pocket pieces. side pieces, and the sleeve piece, and clip in place. Once it's clipped in place, you can take it to the serger and sew a 3/8 seam allowance, or if you don't feel as confident, you can sew it on a sewing machine. If you do decide to sew it on a serger, just be really careful when you get to this edge and make sure that you catch it as you go around the circle. Now that the side is sewn down and the pocket is attached, you need to sew the edge of the pocket. Sew the top edge and the bottom edge 3/8 of an inch with this seam folded toward the pocket, and you'll need to sew that on a sewing machine and not on your serger. Once you've sewn down the little 3/8 of an inch on the top and bottom, repeat the same steps for the other side. Now that both sides and pockets have been sewn together, you'll want to come back to the sewing machine and edge stitch the pocket to the back bodice on top by sewing very close to the edge here and making sure the seam is folded down underneath. You can kind of see it through here from the back, and sew down 1/8 of an inch from the edge. Now you can see that the understitching for the back is done. You'll need to come over and do the understitching for the front, but it's a little bit different. You need to make an L shape instead of just going straight down. Being careful not to sew the back part of the pocket. You want to start a 1/2 inch, come out a 1/2 inch, and go down, and sew all the way down to the bottom, and then sew the bottom part of the L shape to the bottom side of the pocket. After you top stitch the front in the L shape, it should look like this, and then you'll do the same thing for the other pocket. Now that you have completed pockets on both sides of your Tami hoodie, it's time to move on to the hood portion. The first step is take both outer hood pieces, lay them right sides up. You may also want to refer to the pattern piece because one piece you have to cut facing down and one you cut facing up. So they don't get mixed up, you might want to refer to the pattern pieces when you're laying out the outer hood if this is the first one that you've done. Then, once you're sure they're facing the correct way, match them up, right sides together. And sew around the round edge at a 3/8 seam allowance. Now that you've sewn around the top and the back of the outer hood, you need to finish off the front edges. You can either fold it down 1/4 of an inch and fold it another inch and then sew all the way down and around, or you can finish off the edges with a serger and then fold it over 1 1/4 inches and sew it all the way around. I prefer to finish my front edges on a serger. It might be helpful to put a clip in the bottom so when you open it up, you don't accidentally turn it around the wrong way and sew down the bottom by accident. You also want to be careful not to cut any extra of the fabric off the edge. So when you're lining it up into the machine, make sure it's against the edge, up against the knife, but not too far over so you don't cut anything off when you're just making the edge stitches. You're going to serge all the way around. You should now have a nice finished edge all the way around the front. I like to open it up so it's a little easier to work with. And you'll take your sewing gauge, just like you would do a hem. You'll fold it over 1 1/4 inches and then pin it all the way down and then sew it all the way down. Then you'll sew all the way around close to the edge of the serge seam until you get to the edge. Now we're back at the sewing machine. When you line up the edge, I use the edge of the serger edge seam and line up my needle close to the edge of that and follow it all the way down. Now that you've sewn all the way down, this is what it should look like. Then turn right sides up and turn it upside down, and you'll be ready to attach it to the bodice. Your Tami should now be turned inside out. Your hood piece should be right sides out and upside down, and you'll match up right sides together, the edge of the hood piece on either side of the sleeve piece. You'll clip it in place right here on either side of this seam Then you'll go and sew down a basting stitch 1/4 inch so that it doesn't move. So once you have it clipped, your next step is to baste it. Now that you have the hood piece basted in place, you need to match up the back of the seam from the hood to the center back of the hoodie. You'll match the front center of the Tami to the front center of the hood, and then clip all the way around. Once you have it clipped all the way around, you'll baste 1/4 inch seam allowance all the way around. Now you have the outer hood basted all the way around, turn it right sides out. You can see that the hood matches up on either side of the seam, and make sure it's attached all the way around. And then you're ready to move on to the crossover hood. Before you put together your crossover hood pieces, you'll need to refer back to the pattern piece and make a note of where the drawstring needs to go on the left and the right side. You also need to mark the triangle at the bottom with a clip or a pin on each hood piece. I've marked my placement for a grommet with a Sharpie, but you could use a fabric pin if it's a lighter fabric. With this being a darker fabric and the same color Sharpie, it didn't matter too much. And that's the placement where you're going to want to put your interfacing, shiny side down, and iron it in place. And since this is a knit, try to use the lowest setting on your iron that the interfacing will attach with. Press your interfacing on to each of the crossover hood pieces, and then you'll be ready to attach the grommets. For this project, I tried out a couple different grommet tools. I started with the plier option that you can just grab from the hardware store, but when I got home I realized that they only had one piece, and for stability for fabric I really felt like they needed more than one piece. This is my test fabric piece, and you can see that it's also a lot smaller than the 1/4 inch requirement, and it also broke on the end when I installed those. So I went to a fabric store and got a 2-part eyelet kit. It comes with a little installation pieces, and it comes with a little plastic piece that goes in between these two pieces. And it says you don't have to use interfacing on these, but I think it just gives it a little more stability, so I intended to use the interfacing even though it said you didn't have to use it. On the fabric comparison, you can see the difference in size, and it looks quite a bit more durable. The last thing you want after you complete a hoodie is for your drawstring to fall out or your eyelet not to look completely professional. So I suggest the 2-part eyelet, or the fabric stores also have larger options for the plier tool. So you might want to try a few options before you decide what's best for you. Once you've decided which grommet tool you want to use to install the grommets, you're ready to place them on the interfacing piece. Then you're going to cut a little tiny slit in the interfacing, and you want it to go through the fabric, but you want the hole to be smaller than the inside of the grommet. It's stretchy fabric, so it really will stretch to fit over the spot with a tiny slit with your scissors. The interfacing certainly gives it a little bit more stability, so you might have to really carefully stretch this to make it fit, but it should be able to go all the way through and fit nicely. And then you'll put it on top of this bottom piece. And then put the plastic piece on top. And then the top piece with the scratchy side down towards the fabric. And you'll place the top piece, making sure everything's lined up, and then hit it a few times with the hammer. Once a grommet is installed, this is what it should look like on the back, and this is what it should look like from the front side. And then you'll just repeat the same step for the other crossover hood piece. Now you're going to want to assemble these crossover pieces very similarly to the way that you did the outer hood piece. You'll match up right sides together, matching along the top and the back, and pin it in place and sew it at a 3/8 seam allowance. The next step is to finish the raw edge around the front. You can either serge around the raw edge all the way around, or you can fold under 1/4 inch and then fold over another inch and sew all the way around the edge. I prefer to serge without cutting off any of the edge, and then go back and hem it down. And just like we did before with the outer hood piece, we'll take the sewing gauge at 1 1/4 inches and fold over the edge, clip all the way around, and then sew along the edge just like you would do a hem. And it is important to note that you do cover the back side of the grommet, so the grommet is fully enclosed once you hem all the way around the edges. Now that you've hemmed down the outer edge, this is what the finished product should look like. The hood piece should now be facing right sides up, and the 2 clipped pieces that you marked from the pattern piece need to cross over the left side when wearing, over the right side when wearing, and match up the edges and clip in place. Then you'll match up the loose edges all the way around on both sides and clip in place. Now you're ready to attach the hood to the Tami piece. The first thing you need to do is pull out your sleeve pattern piece, and the marking on the shoulder, you'll need to place a clip right in that spot. You'll also need to mark the center front of the Tami. Then making sure the hood piece is upside down and right sides out. you'll match up the seam of the Tami to the back seam of the hood. You'll match up the center front to the center front of the hoodie. And this is the piece that's on the pattern marking. And then you'll match the raw edge to the shoulder clip. Now that everything's clipped together, this is what it should look like. There's quite a few layers here, so when you sew around, make sure you catch all the layers. You'll sew this at a 3/8 seam allowance. Now that you've sewn all the way around the edge of the neckline to attach the crossover hood, this is what it should look like. I'll turn it right sides out and make sure the hood was correctly sewn all the way around and none of the layers got missed. And once everything is correct, this is what the double hood should look like. Now you're ready to move on to cuffs and bottom bands. Now take one of the cuff pieces and fold it right sides together and clip it on the sides. Then sew down the raw edge at a 3/8 seam allowance. Then fold the edges down so that wrong sides are together, matching up the side seam. Then you're ready to match it up with the Tami sleeve piece. Your Tami sleeve piece should now be inside out. And you'll take your little cuff piece and match it up to the side seam to side seam, right sides together. Then clip it all the way around and then sew it down at a 3/8 seam allowance. Now that it's sewn all the way around the edge, repeat the same step for the other sleeve. Now place one bottom band piece right sides up, then take the second piece and place them right sides together, matching up the short edges. Then sew down each short edge with a 3/8 seam allowance. Now fold it down wrong sides together, matching up the side seams. And use your seams on the side as your quarter points and the center front and center back as the other quarter point. Then you'll match it up to the Tami piece. Now you want to quarter the Tami piece using the side seams as the quarter point and the front center and back center as the other quarter point. Then you'll match up the bottom band and sew all the way around at a 3/8 seam allowance. And since you have pockets in this one, you'll need to make sure that you catch the seam of the pocket at the bottom as well. The pockets are pinned down, and the bottom band is clipped all the way around, and now you're ready to take it to the sewing machine. Now that the bottom band is attached, the last step is the drawstring. If you decide to add a drawstring to the Tami, you need to decide how long you need it to be. I like to measure from grommet to grommet all the way around. Once you have at least that measurement, you can adjust and see how much you want it to hang down on each side. Now that you know the correct measurement for your drawstring, you need to add a safety pin to the raw edge. Then you'll take the safety pin and thread it through one of the eyelets. And continue to thread it until you get all the way to the other side. The drawstring is threaded all the way around and coming out on both eyelets. The last step is to knot the end on both sides of the drawstring, and your Tami hoodie is complete. I hope you're enjoying the Tami series. We'd love to hear your feedback in the comments below. Thanks so much for watching and sewing along with me today. We'll see you next time.